Hello, everyone.
Hey, guys.
Rory, this is Lauren. I'm going to be sharing the presentation today. Should I go ahead and share my screen and get everything set up, or?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Perfect.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having us. Let's see.
Give people another minute or so to hop on.
Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. And Roy, I just want to test the sound on our first slide really fast. I'm just going to play a quick little blurb to see if you guys can hear it.
All right.
Hey, Laurie, this is Wanda. Sorry so early.
You can hear.
Hey, Laurie.
Okay, it gets clearer as you go into the voicemail. I know it's a little bit fuzzy at first, but.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, everybody. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us what you're going to be talking about today, Lauren?
Yes. Give me 2 seconds because Amanda is calling me right now.
No worries.
So I just want to. Hey.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, how are you doing? Good. Good. How about you?
Pretty good. And I know Jimena's on the call as well today. Jimena, do you want to introduce the topic while they're figuring out their tech stuff?
Yeah, sorry, I just jumped onto. I apologize for joining a little late.
No worries.
Yeah, so I wanted to invite Amanda and Lauren in today because a few weeks ago they presented with Shelter Love on this topic, and it's looking back on the historical context of housing insecurity in this country, and the importance of acknowledging the fact that the eviction crisis is an issue that's existed in this country for a really long time, and that now it's just being exacerbated by COVID, and so now it's an official crisis. But the fact that for the history, for the longest time of this country, our history has involved huge gaps for different communities. And I just thought it was so important for us to have that context moving forward. You're saying sorry, someone was talking.
Yeah, someone was unmuted, sorry.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so that's why I thought it was really important for us to have this context before we, embark January 1st with this, when the CDC moratorium expires, and the importance of how animal welfare organizations can contribute and can play a role in making sure families can stay together. So yeah.
Thank you so much. What an important topic. We're really lucky to have y'all here today talking with us. Lauren, Amanda, do you all want to introduce yourselves?
Yes. Amanda, are you on? Oh, there you are. Yay.
I'm going to come off a video for just a second to say hi to everyone. Oh, see, it's already freezing. I've had computer issues and my new computer just got delivered like 15 minutes ago. So it hasn't been set up yet. So it seems to stay okay if I am off of video. So I'm going to stay off of video. So sorry, everyone, that I can't be on video while we're talking. But I'm Amanda Arrington, the Senior Director of the Pets for Life program at HSUS.
Thank you for being here. And Lauren?
Hey y'all, I'm Lauren Loney. I am the Texas State Director at HSUS based in Austin. So working closely with APA and others on lots of different things, and getting to be involved with HOS is luckily one of those. And I was an affordable housing attorney before I transitioned to animal welfare work. So I have been super excited to be talking about this intersectional work since I started this position in May.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Well, excited to see your presentation.
So I'm going to start out by letting everyone know that we encourage for there to be conversation throughout. Lauren and I have talked about this topic now multiple times, and if you let us, we will take up every single second with information and not leave any room for question and answer or comments or input. So we actually appreciate and encourage you to interrupt us throughout. I think that this is a group that probably likes to have dialogue around issues, and this is such an important one. So don't feel like it's an interruption. If there's something that you have a question about or want to contribute to, you have a comment, you don't even have to put it in the chat. Like, you can unmute and talk if you would like, if that's okay with everybody. I know Lauren and I, that's kind of the way that we preferred, and then we'll still try to get through everything. So as we go along, just keep that in mind. You're welcome to put it in the chat and we can, respond there as well. But I didn't want anyone to feel it would be a bother or an interruption if you wanted to talk throughout the hour. We are really open to that. So,
Awesome.
So we're going to start with a couple of voicemails that of people who have been faced with housing challenges. We're going to share a lot of data and information that's necessary, but the human element can sometimes get lost in all of that. So we thought it would be really impactful to start before sort of getting bogged down in the numbers, to hear from people who have actually been in a position and experiencing housing insecurity, and the way that is traumatizing for them and for their pets, because the situation is extremely emotionally draining and devastating. And so we just want the discussion to sort of happen through the lens of people who are going through these challenges in day-to-day life. So we're going to start with a couple of voicemails.
Hey, Laurie, this is Wanda. Sorry so early in the morning. I need you really bad because she did go through the illegal eviction thing and then start putting her stuff out. And she said she was going to put Nova in the town. Please, if you get this message, please come and get Nova for at least 2 or 3 days for me. Please. I mean, I think I can just swing with Precious if even I have to go to the motel for them. But I got a place to go. We just try to come. My social worker is working with me right now, ASAP, to come up with the money, the other $200, so we can have our spot so Nova can be there and Precious. But just in case it's going to take me a couple of days, Lord, please call me right back. Please don't let me put my baby and turn him away. Please call me right back. Please.
Hi, Miss Laurie. This is Leisha, the young lady that stays at the hotel. I was just calling to let you know that I appreciate everything that you have done for me, and I just wanted to let you know that I can no longer afford to keep staying at that hotel, and I have nowhere take my dogs, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to surrender them. I don't really want to take them to the shelter because I'm in fear of them killing them. And I just don't know what to do. I've still been looking at figure out the foster thing or the lodging thing. Just really at a loss from there.
And so as Jimena, I think, said briefly in the introduction, that you all as a group have talked a bit already, and we'll be talking a lot more about what shelters can do, about programs and services and support. And that's going to be so important to endless numbers of people and pets. But what we thought would be useful to spend some time on today is to really understand where we're at right now, specific to COVID and the pending eviction crisis, and then a little bit more about the sort of epidemic of affordable or lack of affordable housing in our country even before COVID, just because,
Sorry.
it's okay. It helps to sort of have that context and have the full information, so then we are able to sort of develop the best responses and the most sustainable solutions. So just a little bit about kind of in this moment in time, like where things stand. We are now, sort of creeping up towards the end of the CDC moratorium that was issued in September that goes through December 31st. It is not an automatic moratorium like some previous to it, but it has certain criteria that people must met in order to be covered. It has absolutely helped a lot of people, but there are a lot of people that it hasn't covered. And so when that expires, December 31st, if there is not an extension, if there are no other efforts made to protect renters and to provide some sort of assistance, then we potentially, the projections from the people who do this work specific to housing have made is that there's some 30 to 40 million people, which is around 17 million households, that could be at risk of losing their homes January 1st. And with 30-day eviction notices filed, really starting to see that happen in February. And with the estimates of how many renters have pets, how many people in the country have pets, that puts the number at around 10 million based on that projection of the people in the households that could be looking at losing their homes. And then within those numbers, a bit of what we're going to talk about is that the distribution of the risk is not even, that Black and brown households are twice as likely to rent as are white households in the country. And so there are certain communities that are looking at potential devastation at an even higher rate. And so with the moratoriums, to kind of just bring us all on the same page with it. So when the pandemic started, there were many states that had their own moratoriums. There were even some local municipalities at a city or county level that had some moratoriums. A lot of those have expired over time. We'll add some links in the chat in a little bit that gives you places to go look and see sort of what's currently happening at your state, what might be in place to protect your specific community, but those have really dwindled over time. And the federal moratorium that was in place and it expired in July, it only protected people who lived in government supported housing. So where there were government backed mortgages or where there were federal funding programs. And so the CDC moratorium in a way expanded on that because it covered all renters, but it also put in sort of 5 criteria that people had to meet and had to provide to their landlord in order to receive protection. And that's one of the things that I'll share a link to the CDC page that lists out what those 5 criteria are, and also provide a form that if you don't have it on hand already, that you can just print it out and have it available to provide to people, anyone that you may come into contact with or that may reach out needing support in that way, that it's at least worth a try. And so within all of this, with the moratoriums, what hasn't happened yet, and what Lauren can talk a bit more about as a former housing attorney and really being an advocate that's skilled and experienced in that area, but I think we should all sort of be aware of and know in animal welfare, is that there needs to be rental assistance and rental forgiveness. And that's what we're still kind of crossing our fingers may happen, especially with the new administration taking over at a federal level, that even with the moratoriums, that did not erase the rent that people have been unable to pay. So if someone has 3 months of rent they haven't been able to pay, that is still going to come due at the end of the moratoriums. And so if people have lost their jobs or have lost hours or been underemployed or unemployed, they're still going to be in a position of not being able to pay that back rent because that has still been accumulating. So without some sort of program that is actually forgiving rent or providing assistance so that people can pay the rent and landlords can receive those monies, we're still in a really bad situation. So that's kind of where we are right now.
I have a question quickly.
Yeah.
Those people's voices that we heard, where was that and when was that? And did they end up getting to stay with their pets?
Yeah, so those are both in Durham, North Carolina. You heard them both say the same name, which is the person who runs Beyond Fences in Durham. Her name is Lori. Wanda and Nova, that was the first voicemail. You saw Wanda and Nova the cat in the picture. Nova was not able to stay with Wanda. And the second one is Leisha and her 2 dogs. And Leisha is still with her dogs. She had, through her own networks, someone who could foster if we could put up a temporary fence in the yard so the dogs could stay there, and we were able to do that. And then they were reunited when she found a place. It took her about 6 months to find a new place to live. Wanda still has not. It's probably 9-10 months into the process, and she's renting a room right now from a boarding house.
Thank you.
So sort of thinking about kind of where we're at with the moratoriums, with the lack of rental assistance. Again, we want to kind of talk about the kind of lack of sort of willpower or commitment at all levels of government to make safe, stable, affordable housing a basic human right. That's really sort of at the core of why we're in this crisis, is that even before the pandemic, that isn't something that's sort of been recognized in our policymaking and in our government at a federal, state, and local level. And so just to kind of talk through how it works at all of those different levels, because there's opportunity to engage with elected officials at all of those. So federally, the government chooses the funding of how much money to give, where to give it, the programs that are supported, and sort of the policies around that. So that's your congressperson, your senator, and of course then the president as well. At a state level, it is a state government's sort of decision on how to prioritize federal money that they receive. And so when they get money from the federal government, where do they put that? How do they spend it? So that's your state legislators, your state representatives. But then also states can contribute their own money and from their own budgets to issues of housing if they so choose. And then at a local level, there's quite a bit that your city council, your mayor, your board of county commissioners, people who are in those positions also have budgets where money can be allocated not only for support services, but also around development and tax breaks and how housing is built and offered to the public. So there's a real opportunity at every level for animal welfare advocates who are interested in really participating in and making sure that people stay in their homes, so pets stay in their homes, to be able to engage. And while a lot of the focus around affordable housing is on supply, and rightfully so, that is a big concern of just how many rental units are available and how many are affordable and where they're at, all of those things matter. What is equally or maybe more important and often gets left out of the conversation is around wages. that really what is at the root of the issue is people receiving a living wage, and that without a living wage, being able to afford market rate rent, and especially as rents are increasing, that it just becomes really out of reach for so many people. And I think the next slide sort of shows that, of how rents have outpaced wages for many, many years. Is that next, Lauren? Yeah, so you can see here just from 2000 that rents have increased significantly while incomes have not. And so it becomes a really significant problem for people. So if you've attended any sort of PFL training at all, you've probably heard us talk about poverty rates in the US and the disparities in income, and also the racial wealth gap. But we want to just share a little bit of that with you here because it really is so foundational to issues of housing. And so we're not going to get to sort of have a full review today, but it's something for us at least to kind of talk through and just have on everybody's radar. So you can see here that there's an extreme disparity in the US in wealth by race and ethnicity. And this is both a cause and effect of housing challenges. So the home ownership rates, again, as you can see here, there's disparities there as well, because home ownership has a big impact on the level of wealth that someone accumulates over a lifetime, and also intergenerational wealth transfers. Those are two of the biggest ways that people build wealth in this country, is through home ownership and intergenerational transfers. And the wealth that someone has determines so many things about a person's life, including whether they're able to own a home. And so it results in a disparity in home ownership, meaning that a higher rate of people of color are renters. And one way that this came to be is through policies and practices of the past, like restricted covenants and like redlining. And so just to share a little bit of that with you, because it really draws such a clear and direct correlation of what has happened in the past with what we still are seeing today. So you probably heard about the New Deal, or you're familiar with it in some form. To help the United States recover from the Great Depression, the government created the largest welfare program to date in our country. The biggest piece of the New Deal was providing government-backed mortgages. So before the New Deal, home ownership was very limited for people because a person had to provide about 50% down on a home and could only pay out the remaining amount over 5 to 10 years. So there just weren't as many people who were able to achieve that. The New Deal opened up home ownership to tens of millions of people by offering little to no down payment and then being able to have a 30-year loan. And so in today's dollars, about $2 trillion was provided through the New Deal for home ownership support. Unfortunately, about 98% of the recipients of that were white. And so the way that the mortgages were provided and approved was through this national appraisal system that was set up in every city and town across the country. And that appraisal system guided where the government-backed funds would be given and would not be given. And so areas that were deemed hazardous, they were marked in red on these maps, and that's where the mortgage support would not be provided. And those were predominantly Black communities, and it became known as redlining. And then the areas where that were marked best and good, those were predominantly white communities and where the loans were given. And so white people were literally given an advantage, while people of color were kept from the opportunity of building generational wealth. And so this government sanctioned policy of the 1930s really set up the racial and economic segregation that we still see today. And so here you can see a study that was conducted in 2018 that looked at all of the redlining that occurred in 1937 and 1938. and about 75% of the areas that were redlined then are still the most economically distressed communities today. And the vast majority of those redlined areas are still mostly communities of color today. And then conversely, of the areas that were best and that received that government support, about 90% are still the middle to upper class communities today, and the vast majority of those areas are white. And so when home ownership, when it's made difficult or even impossible for entire groups of people, renting becomes the option. And so that's what was referenced earlier, that you have communities that are disproportionately impacted as renters, and definitely as low income renters with the wealth and income disparities. And so what this map shows, it's kind of hard to see. If you have really good eyes, maybe you can see it, but I'll tell you what it's showing is that state by state, there is not a state that has sufficient available and affordable rental units for low income families. And so the numbers that you see, if you can find your state and read your number, we'll use Texas as an example. There are only 29 affordable and available rental units for every 100 low income families. And this was all pre-COVID. And so this has been just escalated by the economic devastation of COVID. This also does not represent in any way pet-friendly housing. So that's just a whole other layer for people if they are looking for a place to rent that's not only affordable, but that will accept their dog, that doesn't have breed restrictions, that doesn't have weight limits, that doesn't have an exorbitant pet fee that they have to pay. And then we're going to run through these really quickly because I want to give Lauren plenty of time, and we're already running up on a half hour. And there's kind of a lot to take in. So I'll just kind of break it down and just kind of give you the takeaway and the summary of it, because that's really what's most important, is that what this is showing is that the lower income a person is, the more cost burdened with rent a person is. And so the lower income, the higher percentage of a person's income is being spent on rent. And about 73% of extremely low income tenants spend more than 50% of their income on housing cost. And then that next one that Lauren just showed, I think is significant because for many years, I falsely believed that there were sufficient safety nets for people, that if people needed support or needed assistance, it was there, that people, if it was looked for and if it was sought after, that it was there. I've learned that that is not true in many, many cases, and definitely is not true around housing. And so this is just sort of a general takeaway of that, is that 75% of low income renters do not receive federal rental assistance in any way. And this just sort of adds to the frustration in my mind around housing, that in fact, federal housing expenditures, so what the federal government puts their money in, it favors higher income households. So even though it's lower income people who have the most need for support, that's not where the money goes to. Most home ownership expenditures through the federal government go to the top fifth of households. So there are about 60% of federal housing dollars benefit households that have incomes over $100,000. And so then this final one, before Lauren talks, again, is really kind of complicated, and it's kind of hard to see now that I'm looking at it. But I think the kind of takeaway from this is that there are about 7 million households in the US with incomes of $200,000 or more. And there are about 50 million households that have incomes of less than $50,000. And those 7 million households that make more than $200,000 receive a larger share of expenditures on housing than those 50 million with income of less than 50,000. So it's just a lot to sort of understand, that there's well outside of animal welfare, there is just not the necessary and sufficient support for people when it comes to housing, and why Lauren and I think it's so important as animal advocates for us to become housing advocates as well.
Open up the chat really fast, Amanda. So one more thing that I think is really important to add on this slide in particular is that, you know, as a society, we really take for granted all of the financial benefits of homeownership. We take for granted the humongous mortgage interest deduction, right, that we get on our taxes every year. But as far as I know, as far as I can see from my work as an affordable housing advocate for the last few years, there's actually no real reason why renters shouldn't get some sort of deduction on their taxes the same way that homeowners do. So there's just these really significant financial inequities between being a renter and being a homeowner that just contributes to all of this as well. And these are policies that that could and in my opinion should be changed. So, okay, so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here because I think that another major component of why we are in the place that we are in terms of availability of affordable housing. So as Amanda mentioned, in a lot of cases, it's not just numbers of units that is the problem. There are cities like Los Angeles, for example, where technically there is enough housing to house everybody. It's just that the cost of that housing is out of reach for so many people because we live in a society that puts profit over people having a place to live. And so we then fall back heavily on government subsidized programs. This chart shows funding for programs that are governed through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD is our federal housing agency. And you can see that almost every single program has actually lost funding over the last decade. And that's a trend that you would see continued even farther back before 2010. And the two programs that have seen an increase in funding primarily support private investment into the development of subsidized affordable housing. So the blue bar there represents tenant-based rental assistance. Those are called housing choice vouchers. And that's a program where individual tenants get a voucher from HUD. They can then take that voucher to a market rate apartment or a subsidized apartment, and the government will, through that voucher, pay that person's rent, whatever portion of rent that voucher covers. The problem with the tenant-based voucher program is that in states like Texas, landlords can actually discriminate based on source of income. So anywhere in Texas, a landlord can say, let's say this mostly happens in apartment complexes in majority white and higher income neighborhoods. So a landlord can refuse to take a tenant's voucher, and then that person is not going to have the funds to live in this neighborhood. The project-based rental assistance program is actually where HUD gives millions of dollars every year to one landowner or apartment owner who runs an entire subsidized apartment complex. These programs, while they do provide units, they ultimately, in Texas at least, which is where most of my experience is, they end up really furthering racial and economic segregation, because the only places that these developments are built and the only places where vouchers are accepted are in majority Black and Latino neighborhoods that are also economically segregated. And just one other thing, even if these programs, I mean, were fantastically run programs, the amount of money lost in all of the other programs combined is not made up for through the increased investment in these two programs. So even if they were fully successful, the takeaway is still that affordable housing is not funded sufficiently. So I want to give a little bit of an overview of the legal response to all of the policies that Amanda discussed earlier. So in addition to the redlining of the 1930s, it was very common in the United States to see restrictive covenants in neighborhoods. Many of these, especially in older cities and older suburbs, you might even still see these racially restrictive covenants on the books in deeds of sale. Of course, they're illegal, but there's actual language in deeds of sale that said a Black person may not live in this neighborhood, may not buy a home in this neighborhood. So these explicitly racist covenants were preventing even Black families that had the economic means to move into wider and wealthier neighborhoods were kept out on the basis of race. So to counteract this ubiquitous racism in housing policies through government and private actions, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act in 1968 as part of a suite of civil rights laws that passed in the 60s. And this law made it illegal to refuse to rent or sell or otherwise make unavailable a housing unit on the basis of being in a protected class, which includes race, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or handicap. And interestingly, sex wasn't added to the Fair Housing Act until the mid-70s. So you, as a woman, perhaps a single woman renter, I could have been discriminated against on the basis of sex illegally, and familial status. So people who had kids, you could have been discriminated against on the basis of that until the mid-80s. So, what we know from seeing the lasting impacts of redlining, the current wealth gap, and the current inequities in home ownership versus renter when filtered through race, is that even the Fair Housing Act, which was meant to correct these sorts of laws, these sorts of practices, have not fully addressed the issue that we see here. And we still have a significant amount of work to do before safe, affordable housing is available. And very quickly, I just want to highlight how important state action is in this process. So we had the Fair Housing Act that passed in 1968. This case, Inclusive Communities Project versus the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, which is our state housing agency. This case came down from the Supreme Court in 2015. And under the Fair Housing Act, the law was passed in an effort to address overt intentional racism. So things like the issues with redlining and not backing mortgages for people of color and the overtly racist restrictive covenants. But there's this other much more insidious type of discrimination that many of y'all are probably familiar with, that's called disparate impact. And that discrimination is defined loosely as when policies or practices that might be neutral on their face, meaning they're not overtly racist, end up having a negative and disproportionately negative impact on a group of people based on their protected class. So in this case, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs is the agency that is responsible for almost all development of affordable housing, subsidized affordable housing in the state of Texas. And what Inclusive Communities Project, which is this fantastic advocacy organization out of Dallas, what they found is that across the state and in Dallas in particular, TDHCA was approving the construction of affordable housing significantly more in neighborhoods of color, in Black and Latino neighborhoods, than they were approving the construction of subsidized affordable housing in white neighborhoods. So the argument was that TDHCA's policies, how they decided to fund affordable housing development, was continuing to cause racial segregation in the state of Texas. And so even though there were no overtly racist policies in place, the question was, were they violating the Fair Housing Act based on this disparate impact liability? And this was the first case that recognized disparate impact liability in the Fair Housing Act. So it was a monumental win for the Inclusive Communities Project. And this majority opinion, I think, is really, really important. And it speaks to how insidious unconscious prejudices and biases can be. And I think it really speaks to how even when we as advocates in this movement, even how we need to be making sure that we're thinking about all of our policies through a lens of equity so that we can recognize if our policies are disparately impacting a population of people based on their protected class status as a protected class. In addition to these state issues, we also have very insidious and problematic industry standards in housing and also local government decisions, as Amanda previously mentioned. So this is a provision in the Texas Apartment Association's standard lease. This lease is used in almost every major apartment complex in the state. And this is what we call a gentrification provision. And so issues with gentrification are primarily that, as a city starts to invest in a neighborhood that is primarily a low socioeconomic, typically majority Black and brown neighborhood, whiter, wealthier people move in, and the original residents of that neighborhood are ultimately displaced as they can no longer afford to stay in these neighborhoods where frequently families have lived for generations. I'm probably preaching to the choir here when it comes to understandings of gentrification. So this lease provision gives a landlord the right to terminate a lease with only a 30 days written notice of termination if the landlord is planning to, quote, demolish your apartment or close it, and it will no longer be used for residential purposes for at least 6 months. So what this allows the landowner to do is sell a property, demolish it, and then a developer can come in and build new units. That's what that for at least 6 months thing is, because that's how long it would typically take to get through the process of selling, demolishing, and rebuilding residential units, at least 6 months. This clause has been used in Texas, and this is one example of a Dallas apartment complex that in 2016, pursuant to that lease provision, the landlord gave tenants written notice that after that date, they would all go on a month-to-month lease and their leases would not be renewed. At the time, these units were renting for 1-bedroom apartments around $800 a month. For those of you who know Dallas, you know that that is extremely, that's an affordable rent, not for everyone, of course, but relative to a lot of other places, 800s is doable. And this developer came in, Trammell Crow, purchased this apartment complex. The local government had to make several decisions to allow this change to happen. They had to approve the development plan. So the government said that they're going to approve this process and they're going to approve the development plan. And the government had to approve a rezoning ordinance or a rezoning request to allow this lot to be zoned for mid-rise apartments. So we had the TAA apartment lease provision, that standard. We had a developer coming in who knew they could make a bunch of money if they tore down these units and replaced them with luxury apartments. And then we had the local government making multiple decisions with the full knowledge that once tenants were displaced from this apartment complex, they likely wouldn't be able to find a spot in this rapidly changing and gentrifying neighborhood. So today, these studio and 2-bedroom units rent from $1,400 to $2,400 per month. So it's very unlikely that any tenants that were displaced were able to come back to that particular building. Am I missing any questions, by the way? I see some comments popping up.
Nope.
Okay. So y'all talked a lot about some of the steps that shelters and rescues can take to be good allies in your communities for pet owners who are being evicted, and how, you know, y'all can provide resources and programs in your own facilities to, you know, be community support systems. And what I want to just touch on here towards the end of our call is how animal welfare advocates can relatively easily become advocates for broad, affordable housing protections and strengthening tenant protection laws in your states. So I would say there are some, and all of this information is in the eviction response toolkit. So for more details on anything that I'm saying, definitely check out the toolkit. And there's also, you know, sample documents and stuff in there. So often these, particularly when we're talking about displacement, people aren't aware that this is happening. You know, everybody sees apartments being torn down, but the underlying issues and social justice issues with apartment complexes being torn down and replaced with luxury condos is really kept quiet, and that's intentionally kept quiet. So using the media to bring attention to the need for stronger tenant protections and preventing displacement is a really strong way to make sure that we're using our voices to get this message out. So write letters to the editor, write op-eds. If you see something happening, like an apartment complex that's being demolished, try to learn about what's going on. Contact a local affordable housing advocacy group, contact your city, and bring attention to what is happening in your community. Most of our local, state, and federal legislators are not going to automatically think about this really important nexus between housing and animal welfare. So send a one-pager about this issue and how it affects you to your legislators, and invite them in for a further discussion about why this issue is important to you and why you want them to support not only animal welfare initiatives, but affordable housing initiatives as well. I already mentioned you can connect to your state or local groups, and we'll give you some resources in the next slide to find those folks. And then specifically in the context of COVID, send a letter or make a phone call to your local and state and federal legislators, if you can, asking them to support any efforts to provide increased rental assistance or extended eviction moratoriums. As Amanda mentioned, without rental assistance, the issue of evictions is only going to be kicked down the road until eviction moratoriums eventually do expire, and they will expire. And if these tenants who have been unable to pay rent can't, as soon as those eviction moratoriums expire, all of that rent is going to become due. So we have to have increased rental assistance. And then last, social media is another, besides traditional media, is another great way to bring attention to this issue. And this share graphic that you see on this slide is actually in the Eviction Response Toolkit. Feel free to take it, share it, tag your legislators in your post, tag your friends and family in the post, and just try and get as many people talking about this issue and bringing awareness to this issue as possible. So some great resources for people to get started with as they're diving into this. I know it seems like a lot, but there are groups like the National Low Income Housing Coalition that, like APA, like HSUS, like all of us here in animal welfare, we make it really, really easy for people to take action, and these affordable housing groups do the same thing. So if you visit NLIHC's Take Action page, there's a list of federal asks that nonprofit is making, and there are COVID-specific requests for legislators to support certain bills. For example, expanding the CARES Act and providing housing rental assistance within that process. So click on that Take Action page. You fill out the action alert just like you would for any of us, and that goes straight to your legislator. It's a fantastic and easy way to make sure that you're using your voice. NLIHC also has a state partner directory that I mentioned before. Find that state partner directory, and then you can connect with the local and state affordable housing groups that are doing work in your area. Just a shout out, if you're in Texas, feel free to reach out to me, and I can connect anybody to groups or have further discussion in Texas as well. So I know we probably have a lot of other nonprofits and other organizations on this call. I would highly encourage you to check out the Opportunity Starts at Home page. This is a kind of a sister group to National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it is specifically designed for non-affordable housing groups to start engaging in this intersectional advocacy. There's roundtables you can join. There are staff at the Opportunity Starts at Home program that can answer questions. It's a really great resource. And then finally, our eviction response toolkit that I think is even going to be expanded upon through Amanda. You can talk more about this if y'all are going to discuss this today. But already in the existing toolkit you find online are sample letters to the editor, a great sample one-pager press release, and then sample emails and dialogue, like phone call dialogues for chatting with legislators. The very last thing I want to share is a success story or a potential success story that happened earlier this year in West Hollywood. And this was an expansion of an existing eviction order in the city. And animal welfare advocates pushed for this expansion in West Hollywood and got two key wins, two key protections for pet owners in rental properties. The first is a requirement that all housing subsidized or funded through the local Affordable Housing Trust Fund has to permit companion animals in the facility during the COVID-19 emergency. Blanket statement: if you're subsidized or if you're funded, you have to allow pets during COVID-19. It's a really great provision, and fortunately will protect or potentially protect a lot of the lowest income renters who are typically in these subsidized units. The second component of this ordinance provided a protection for unauthorized companion animals in a unit. So prior to this eviction ordinance, West Hollywood had limitations on when a landlord could evict a tenant during the COVID-19 crisis. There's a blanket moratorium on evictions. One exception to that rule is if a tenant was doing something that constituted a quote dangerous and unsanitary condition. What this ordinance said, is that the presence of an unauthorized pet alone is not in itself a dangerous and unsanitary condition. So a landlord can't use an unauthorized pet as an excuse that it's causing a dangerous and unsanitary condition in order to kick a tenant out. And so that's a really important protection. Now, it doesn't protect against pets that otherwise do cause a dangerous or unsanitary condition, but an unauthorized pet alone isn't enough to be evicted. And the last thing I want to share is this fantastic statement from the Los Angeles County Department of Animal Care and Control. They submitted public comments about this ordinance, which is something that most of us as advocates can and should be doing. And they have a really powerful quote in here that I'm going to read to y'all. So, keeping pets and people together whenever possible is better for the health and well-being of the person and the pet they care for. The effects of separating people from their pets has been well documented during disasters, in domestic violence situations, and in the housing and homelessness crisis. People will refuse shelter and services, choose to live in their car, and risk everything to remain with their pet. And so what we know is that we have to be involved in this issue, because we know how much people are connected to their pets. We're all connected to our pets. So it's really, really important for us to step outside of our comfort zones and become staunch affordable housing advocates, not only for the people, but also for the pets that they have at home with them. So with that, I'll turn it over for questions or back to Amanda.
Yeah, I think if there are any questions or thoughts, we had some chat going on, Lauren, just sharing of resources and a couple of questions, and I've already shared your email, just FYI. And I don't know if there are questions or comments, but also just wanted to leave space to Humana if you wanted to share a bit about the extended toolkit. That's probably already been talked about, but since I haven't been on all of these calls, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so we're so excited that we were able to partner with HSUS and AWA on this toolkit. So the toolkit, the link is already in the chat if you want to take a look at it already. There are a lot of resources there, especially in the advocacy section. So if you want to start looking at it now, definitely go ahead. Our toolkit that we've all combined efforts with will have even more resources on there, and we'll hopefully have it live before January 1st, which we talked about last week. But yeah, it's just a collaboration to make sure we have even more on there. But go ahead and check it out. The sample documents are already on there, which makes it really easy to start, a campaign with your shelter. Like, let's get everyone to text our representatives. Let's get, easy steps to start speaking up and to start advocating for keeping pets and their people together. So I'm just really excited that we've been able to work together on this, and excited for the expanded toolkit.
Amanda, I just want to add one more thing to just really like hammer home how important it is that this movement uses its voice, because I've never seen a group of people, and by people I mean the animal welfare movement in general, who are more vocal and more advocate and more dogged in their approach to being advocates. And one really interesting facet of affordable housing and discouraging facet of affordable housing advocacy is that if you were to go speak to a legislator who is sponsoring a bill that is pro tenant protection, for example, or another affordable housing bill, the people that they're going to hear from the most are going to be the people in the industry and the people who are least likely to want tenant protections. So very rarely do legislators hear from people supporting strong affordable housing. And it's really, really important to recognize that even emailing your legislators when you see these bills come up is going to make an impact, because the threshold right now for getting noticed is so low because so few people actually reach out about these issues. And it's like the squeakiest wheel gets the grease, right? We have to be more vocal.
And I will add to that.
Soapbox.
But I'm gonna join you on that soapbox and go in even harder at a local level. That yes, your state legislators, but really where I know so many animal advocates have strong personal relationships with their city council, with their mayor, with their county manager, that there's so much that can be done at that level as well. And it's not sort of the same as waiting for a bill to come up. You can sort of be preemptive and having a conversation and say, in the annual budget meetings, why is this not a higher priority? Why are we not talking about the effects of this on our community? So I think that that's a really natural and easy way for animal advocates to kind of initiate those conversations.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a ton of information. I wish we had more time to talk through this, so we'll have to try to invite you all back so we can keep talking. Thank you both so much. And thank you, Jimena, as well. Thank you, Amanda and Lauren. And thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you next week. We're gonna have Red Rover talking to us about their domestic violence programs. So look forward to that next week. And we will talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.